A black boy walks into the community pool with a towel and a key fob. But comfort turns to confrontation in seconds. A pool guard shoves with entitlement, not realizing who just got pushed. Then comes the moment no one is ready for. Because when Big Shaq arrives, silence becomes a spotlight, and what was meant to humiliate becomes the story that haunts them. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The sun glared off the chrome of parked SUVs, glinting like polished armor outside identical stucco homes. Flower beds were freshly mulched, flags fluttered on white poles, sprinklers arced rhythmically across manicured lawns, the hiss and snap breaking the silence in regular intervals. It was all pristine, curated, a neighborhood where everything had its place. Shaquille O'Neal, 12, walked with his towel slung over one shoulder, flip-flops slapping lightly against the pavement. His swim trunks were bright blue with a yellow stripe. He held a pair of goggles in one hand, slightly scuffed. A sliver of excitement danced in his step. Today was the first real heat wave of the summer, and the pool was finally open. He passed the community bulletin board by the clubhouse. A laminated sign read, "Pool hours strictly enforced. Residents only." Beneath it, someone had tacked up a flyer, 4th of July Barbecue Planning Committee, sign-up sheet. Names in neat cursive, all the same looped, practiced handwriting, none of them familiar. Shakir's fingers brushed the gate, a metal click as it unlocked. He stepped inside. Inside, the pool shimmered under sunlight. Kids splashed, parents reclined under umbrellas with glossy magazines. There was laughter, music in the distance, faint but present, the low pulse of an invisible speaker system playing curated pop songs no one really listened to but everyone tolerated. He moved past a row of lounge chairs. The towel rack was half full. He spotted a space near the deep end, unclaimed, and made his way there. "Excuse me?" A voice, clipped and polite. Shakir turned. It was a woman in a white tennis skirt and mirrored sunglasses, standing near the snack bar with a half-empty smoothie cup in hand. Her mouth was smiling, but her eyes weren't. "Do you live here, sweetheart?" Shakir blinked. "Yeah, with my mom, on Willow Lane." "Oh, Willow Lane." She repeated it like it tasted off. "You have your keycard then." Shakir reached into his pocket and pulled out the plastic fob, holding it up without saying a word. "Okay, just checking." She nodded too quickly and turned back to her smoothie. Shakir walked away, feeling a flush at the back of his neck. He didn't quite understand. At the pool's edge, he sat, slipped off his flip-flops, and dipped his legs into the water. It was cool, perfect. For a moment, he closed his eyes. 2 boys ran past behind him, laughing. One bumped his shoulder, accidentally. Shakir turned. They were maybe a little older, pale-skinned, freckled. One looked back and muttered, not quite under his breath, didn't know the pool was open to everyone now. Shakir's chest tightened. He said nothing, just slipped into the water. Underneath, things were simpler. The pool distorted sound and light, muffled the world into something dreamlike. He swam a slow lap, then another, trying to ignore the churning thoughts above water. When he surfaced, he saw the 2 boys watching him from the edge, whispering. Their mother, seated nearby, leaned forward to say something to them. Her eyes flicked toward Shakir. He caught her look, not angry, not surprised, just assessing, cold. He climbed out, heading to his towel. The sun had shifted. The space he'd picked was now partly in shadow. He started to lay his towel down, then noticed a pair of flip-flops in the spot he'd chosen, a folded towel. Someone else's. "I was gonna sit there," he said, not accusing, just confused. A girl around his age appeared from behind the umbrella. Long brown hair, sun hat, a paperback novel tucked under one arm. "I don't see your stuff," she said with a shrug. "I just went for a swim." She raised her eyebrows. "Then you should have left something, right?" Shakir hesitated. It was empty. "Well, it's not now." She dropped into the chair, opened her book and didn't look at him again. He moved 2 chairs down, still damp, skin tight with drying chlorine. He didn't bother to lay the towel out, just sat on the chair frame, letting the sun do the work. Around him, the pool glimmered, perfect and loud. One of the older kids, maybe 15, launched a cannonball into the deep end. The splash soaked Shakir's legs. The lifeguard barely looked up from her phone. He sighed, wrapping his arms around his knees. His gaze wandered back to the gate, and stopped. 2 security guards had entered, not in uniform, exactly, but with matching polos and clipped radios. One of them pointed toward the snack bar. Shakir couldn't hear what they were saying. Then they turned toward him. His stomach dropped. The shorter guard spoke first. "Hey buddy, got a second?" Shakir nodded, slowly. His voice was caught somewhere in his throat. Some residents raised a concern. "Mind if we check your address? I already showed my key fob." "Right, but just to confirm for the log." "There's a log now?" The taller guard smiled. "It's just protocol. Nothing personal." Shakir's jaw tightened. He pulled his phone from his bag and tapped through photos. Found the one of his mom standing on their porch. House number clearly visible in the background. Showed it to the guard squinted. "That's Willow Lane?" "Yeah. House They looked at each other. "All right. Thanks. We appreciate it." Shakir watched them leave. The pool suddenly felt too crowded, too loud. He wiped his hands on his towel, trying to shake off the cold that had nothing to do with water. A few minutes later, a woman from the HOA walked by and greeted everyone, but her smile faltered briefly when she passed Shakir. She didn't stop to say hello. Shakir got up, collected his things. He hadn't even been here a full hour. As he walked toward the gate, someone called out, "Hey, pool closes at 6 today, just so you know." It wasn't true. He glanced back. The woman was already walking away. Outside the gate, Shakir paused. The air still smelled like sunscreen and summer grass, but it didn't feel warm anymore. He looked up the street toward his house, and slowly, towel slung once more over his shoulder, began to walk. The sun had started its slow descent, softening the glare, bouncing off the pool's surface. Shadows stretched longer across the deck, and most of the early afternoon crowd had either packed up or shifted to shaded corners. But Shakir stayed. He hadn't planned to, not really, but something inside him had decided, today he would not let discomfort drive him out. He was seated on the far end of the pool now, legs dangling in the shallow end, trying to ignore the lingering stares. A couple of kids played with a beach ball nearby, and a father rinsed off his toddler at the outdoor shower. Normal things, familiar rhythms. For a moment it felt like maybe the awkwardness had passed. Then he felt the nudge. Not hard, not even enough to throw him off balance, but precise. A push with intent. Shakir turned his head. It was one of the same boys from earlier. Pale, thin-lipped, freckled face, set in a smirk. "Oops," the boy said. He didn't sound sorry. Shakir stared at him. Silent. He didn't get up, didn't engage, but the air shifted. A shadow crossed the concrete, behind them. Heavy footsteps. The voice came next. Deep, falsely casual, the kind that pretends to be neutral but never is. "Hey there, champ. Didn't catch your name earlier." Shakir turned. The man was wearing a red polo, with a stitched emblem of the HOA logo on the sleeve. His sunglasses mirrored the pool perfectly, twin lenses of distorted blue. He looked like he spent more time behind a desk than watching swimmers, but the whistle around his neck gave him a thin kind of authority. "Shakir," he said after a beat. The man smiled, sharp and shallow. "Shakir, huh? And you're here with my mom, but she's at work. I came on my own." "Gotcha." He nodded slowly. "Just doing rounds. You got ID?" Shakir hesitated. "You mean, like a driver's license?" The man laughed, but it didn't reach his eyes. "No, kid. Just something to confirm you're not just, wandering in. Pools for residents and guests. You know how it is." "I have the key fob," Shakir said, reaching into his bag. "And our name's on the lease. Shakir O'Neal. We live on Willow." The man made no move to take the fob. Just leaned back, folding his arms. "Willow Lane. Ha. And you're on the account?" "Yes." "Your name specifically?" Shakir swallowed. "It's a family account. My mom's the one Right, so technically your name's not on it." Shakir didn't answer. He could feel the temperature change around them, not in degrees, but in pressure. A woman sitting nearby had turned her chair ever so slightly toward them. A father in swim trunks froze mid-sentence while handing his kid a juice box. The man, Chad, as his name tag now revealed, gave a mock apologetic shrug. "Look, I'm sure it's just a mix-up, but if you're not on the official resident list, I'm gonna need to ask you to call your parent. They can I don't have a phone number memorized." She's at work. Chad's voice dropped just a touch, the faux warmth peeling away. Then maybe you should wait over by the lockers while we sort it out. Shakir stood, towel clutched against his chest now like armor. He walked slowly across the deck. Chad followed, his gait lazy, like a man out for a stroll, but his presence felt towering. At the locker area, the sound of the pool dulled slightly, replaced by the mechanical hum of nearby AC units. Shaker stood with his back to the wall, Chad just a few feet away, arms crossed, sunglasses still in place. You know, Chad began, I get it. Things change, neighborhoods shift, but rules they keep this place safe, orderly. Shakir stared straight ahead, lips pressed in a hard line. You can't expect people not to ask questions when someone just shows up without checking all the boxes. You feel me? Shakir turned to him. I didn't do anything wrong. I never said you did. But his smile told another story. Voices grew behind them, more people had noticed. Some pretending not to. Others half watching with interest. The buzz of curiosity built like static. Shakir looked toward the glass doors of the clubhouse. Inside, someone was on the phone. Someone else glanced out, saw him, and turned away. The silence between Shakir and Chad stretched too long. Then came a voice. Quiet but clear. He lives here. It was the girl from earlier, the one with the sun hat and the paperback. She stood at a distance, arms folded, face unreadable. Chad turned. And you are? Lila. We've seen him before. Willow Lane, across from the Greenbelt. That's his house. My mom's walked by it 100 times. Chad didn't respond right away. His jaw flexed. Shakir stayed still. He could feel the weight of watching eyes on his skin like heat. No one else spoke. No one supported her. No one disagreed either. Chad finally stepped back. All right, thanks for the clarification. He didn't look at Shakir, as he turned and walked off toward the lifeguard station. Lila didn't wait for a thank you. She walked away too, book back under her arm, the brim of her hat tilted forward. Shakir stood there a while longer, heart pounding behind his ribs. Not quite fear, not quite anger. Something colder, older. Eventually he gathered his things. His towel was still damp. The sun had faded behind clouds. The water now shimmered duller. As he walked back toward the exit, people made space without making it obvious. Chairs were adjusted. Eyes pretended not to follow. No one said his name. No one asked if he was okay. Outside the gate, a woman was watering her front garden. She paused as he passed, gave a nod. It looked polite, careful, practiced. He reached the sidewalk. The hum of sprinklers returned. The sky held that end-of-day stillness where everything seems paused. A world waiting for something to happen. But Shakir just kept walking, slow and steady, his towel dragging slightly at the corner. His house wasn't far, but it felt farther than it should have. The sunlight had shifted to amber by the time Shakir reached the edge of the greenbelt behind his neighborhood. He didn't go home. Not yet. He stood in the shadow of the old oak tree near the trailhead, fingers curled tight around his phone. His reflection stared back at him from the dark screen, a mix of pride and exhaustion threading across his face. It had taken everything in him, not to cry at the pool, not out of fear, but out of that quiet, smothering fury only he seemed to feel when someone made it clear, your presence is tolerated, not welcomed. He opened his messages. No small talk. No emoji. Just one word. Now. He hit send and waited. No dots. No reply. He didn't need one. Far from the pool, past the boutique gym, and the wine bar on Crosswind Boulevard, a black Escalade peeled away from the curb without fanfare. It didn't roar. It didn't blare music. It moved with purpose, the engine tuned so precisely it barely whispered over the asphalt. Behind the wheel, Shaquille O'Neal sat alone. Not the entertainer, not the brand ambassador, not the grinning meme. This was the version few people ever saw. This was Big Shaq, the father. He drove with both hands on the wheel, elbows low, shoulders squared. His phone buzzed once in the center console. He didn't check it. He already knew what the message was. He already knew what it meant. His expression was unreadable. Not angry. Not even surprised. Just focused. This wasn't the first time Shakir had needed him. And each time the call was different, but the root of it never changed. He turned onto Palmetto Grove, the street lined with jacaranda trees and white brick mailboxes. The kind of neighborhood where everyone waved, but not everyone meant it. By the time the Escalade pulled into the community pool lot, the sun was grazing the rooftops. Shaq parked cleanly, stepped out, and closed the door with the kind of quiet that demanded more attention than a slammed one ever could. No one saw him arrive, but they felt it. At the pool, the mood had shifted, not just because Shakir was gone, but because something had cracked in the atmosphere. A few parents had packed up early. A lifeguard checked the time more often than usual. Chad, now stationed back at the gate, had returned to his post, but his body language was tighter, alert. Then came the silence. It moved like a ripple. The first sign, the lifeguard, the same one who'd ignored Shakir's earlier discomfort, now stood abruptly, posture stiffening, as she looked toward the entrance. A low, unspoken hush spread from one side of the deck to the other. The pool manager stepped out of the clubhouse, drying his hands on a towel, as if summoned by instinct. He looked up and paused mid-step. No one spoke, but heads turned, one by one, toward the gate. We don't see him yet. We just hear the creak of the latch as the pool gate opens. Slow, deliberate. Then the sound of footsteps, too quiet for a man that large, yet somehow louder than anyone else's presence. A boy dropped his pool noodle. A dad checked his phone, then put it face down, unsure why. Chad looked up. His mouth opened, then closed. Shaq walked in without a word, eyes scanning the space. Not aggressive, not tense, just aware. Every angle, every face, every shadow. He didn't move fast. He didn't need to. The sheer size of him, yes, but also something deeper, commanded stillness. The way generals must have walked through ancient courts. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't ask where Shakir was. He already knew. He stopped at the center of the pool deck, not at the gate, not near the locker room. Dead center, where everyone could see him, but no one had anywhere to hide. For a moment, it was so quiet you could hear the soft hiss of water against tile. Shad approached, hesitant now, his earlier bravado diluted. "Sir, is there something I can help you with?" Shaq said nothing at first, just looked at him, long enough for Chad to shift on his feet. The pool manager stepped in, trying to regain control. "Mr. O'Neill, I didn't know you were visiting today." Shaq turned his head slightly, eyes still locked on Chad. Then he spoke. "When my son walks into a room, I expect him to be treated like he belongs. Especially in the place we pay for. Especially when the only question people have is based on how he looks." Chad's mouth twitched. "There's protocol." "You humiliated him." Shaq's voice didn't rise, but it landed heavy. "You knew he belonged. You were just waiting for him to be unsure of it." A few gasps. Someone fumbled their sunglasses. The lifeguard stepped back without a word. The pool manager cleared his throat. We're going to review everything. The board." "You already reviewed it," Shaq cut in. When no one stepped in. When you all watched it happen. He didn't pace. He didn't point. He stood firm, every word placed like a stone. "Your job isn't to enforce comfort zones. It's to enforce rules. And there's nothing in those rules that says my son has to prove his right to exist." Lila, from her chair near the far umbrella, looked up. Her face was unreadable, but her fingers curled tight around her paperback. Around the deck, parents shifted. Some guilty, some embarrassed, some unsure what they should feel. But all of them quiet. Chad opened his mouth once more, but no words came out. Shaq took a slow breath. "Next time my son calls me, it won't be a conversation." Then he turned. Calm. Unbothered. Like the matter was already settled. He walked out the same way he came in. No noise. No hurry. Just a man who had done exactly what he intended. At the edge of the parking lot, Shakir waited by a bench. His towel folded in his lap now, not clenched. When he saw his father, he stood. They didn't say anything. Shaq just nodded. Shakir nodded back. Then they got in the Escalade. The doors closed. The engine started. The pool behind them remained silent for a long time. Years before the pool was ever filled, before the clubhouse was painted in neutral tones and lined with curated succulents, before the tennis courts and jogging paths and polished signage, there was just land, untamed, sun-baked, forgotten land. A patch of cracked earth and overgrown weeds on the edge of a sprawling suburban master plan that had stalled mid-dream. It was Shaquille O'Neal who saw something in it. Not the athlete, not the pitchman, the investor, the builder, the architect of spaces. He walked the grounds when it was nothing but dust and roots, asked questions others didn't, looked beyond what the brokers saw. He didn't just buy in, he shaped the way it would be used. He wrote a check not only for land acquisition but for infrastructure, for green space, for the pool, the very pool where his son would later be questioned. Back then, the developers had been eager to name-drop him in meetings, put his photo in press releases, secure media headlines about diversity-forward initiatives. They praised his vision, used his name to court interest. But when the money came and the papers were signed, the neighborhood slowly forgot the roots of its foundation, or maybe they chose not to look too closely. The plaque near the pool gate is still there. Bronze, weather-softened but clear, Community Recreation Center, dedicated to equity and access in space. Land donated by the O'Neill Family Foundation. It's affixed to the right of the entrance, beside the key fob scanner. Most residents never notice it, or if they do, they don't connect the dots. Back in the present, Shaq sat beside Shakir, on a bench overlooking the pool. The sky was now lavender and orange, fading into night. The chatter behind them had resumed in muted tones, fragmented, unsure. The atmosphere had shifted again, but this time permanently. Shaq didn't say much. He didn't need to. Shakir held a bottle of water loosely in one hand, the other curled against his thigh. His shoulders were square now, not hunched. He watched the pool, not the people. "You good?" Shaq asked, low. Shakir nodded once. "Yeah." A beat passed. "You didn't yell," Shakir said. "Not even a little." Shaq smiled slightly, eyes still on the water. "That's not how you build things." Shakir glanced sideways at him, puzzled. "What do you mean?" "You can tear something down by yelling. That's easy. But when you want to make them feel the ground shift beneath them, you remind them whose ground it is." Shakir. "Let that settle." He took a sip of his water. From the far side of the pool, Lila stood, watching them. Her mother whispered something to her, and they walked out together, silent, a little slower than before. Inside the clubhouse, Chad and the pool manager were huddled behind the reception desk. Every few minutes someone would gesture toward the bench where Shaq sat. No one approached. A few parents started packing up. The ones who had earlier been loudest about rules, about protocol, suddenly seemed uncertain. One mother walked her kids out the side gate, avoiding eye contact. Shakir tapped his foot slowly on the concrete. "They didn't know," he said, quiet. Shaq's brow lifted slightly. "They didn't know whose name was on that plaque. Didn't know what you built here, who you are." Shaq turned to face his son. "They knew," he said plainly. "Or they could have. They just didn't care to look close enough." Shakir absorbed that in silence. "You know the difference?" Shakir shook his head. "Questioning your access is about rules. Questioning your skin is about control. That's what they were doing." Shakir didn't reply. He just looked down at the towel in his lap. His hands were steady now. Shaq reached into his jacket, pulled out a small card. It was old, edges soft, corners a little worn. He handed it to Shaq. On the front was a photo, a younger Shaq standing in front of the construction site, where the pool now shimmered. In his hand, a shovel. In the background, Shakir is a toddler, sitting in the dirt with a plastic dump truck. Shakir turned it over. On the back, a short phrase written in neat pen: "Build where they said you couldn't. Own what they think you rent." "Grandpa wrote that," Shaq said. "After we bought this land, said I should keep it on me, in case I ever forgot." Shakir smiled faintly. "They'll still pretend they don't know. Let them pretend," Shaq said, "but never let them make you question it." At the clubhouse, the lights flicked on. A janitor passed through with a mop bucket, nodding respectfully as he spotted Shaq and Shakir. A small gesture but sincere. The pool glowed now under blue lighting, the kind designed to feel upscale. Shakir looked at it for a long time. Not with longing, just with clarity. "I think I'm ready to go," he said. Shaq stood, offered a hand. Shakir took it. They walked toward the exit together, slow and steady. As they passed the entrance, Shakir paused and glanced at the bronze plaque. This time, he read it fully, really read it. He took in every word, then he nodded once, and kept walking. No one tried to stop them. No one said anything, but several watched them go. And the space they left behind felt different now, like it had shifted an inch to the left, permanently off its axis, because what they didn't know had been laid bare. Shakir wasn't just a boy with a fob. He was the son of the man who built the ground beneath their feet. The HOA conference room wasn't built for conflict. Designed for brunch meetings and flower arrangement demos, It had pale gray walls, forgettable art, and a long oval table that somehow made every seat feel both important and insignificant. But today it hosted something else entirely: consequence. Mid-morning sunlight filtered through vertical blinds, casting a grid of light across the polished surface of the table. Outside, landscapers trimmed hedges in clean lines. Inside, the air was still. Shaquille O'Neal entered without announcement. He didn't wait to be called. He didn't bring an entourage, just a single folder in hand. No briefcase, no theatrics. He wore a dark suit, the kind that fit like it had been custom-made, because it was. He greeted no one. Just moved to the chair at the far end of the table, and sat, slowly, deliberately. Across from him, Chad adjusted the cuffs of his polo shirt. Sweat had already broken beneath his collar. The HOA manager, Gregory Stein, dabbed his forehead with a folded napkin. He'd insisted on holding this meeting, internally. But when Shaq agreed, immediately, without protest, that very calm became its own kind of threat. "I appreciate you coming, Mr. O'Neal," Gregory began, his voice rehearsed but hollow. "We were hoping to address things before they got any larger than necessary." Shaq said nothing. He opened the folder, pulled out a single sheet of paper, and slid it forward. The top was stamped with the HOA's own logo. "Your pool access policy," he said. Gregory glanced at it, then back at Shaq. "It clearly states that residents' dependents may access facilities unaccompanied after age 12. You've seen this. You've written addendums. There's no ambiguity." Chad shifted in his chair. Well, it's about identification. It's protocol." Shaq didn't look at him. He kept his eyes on Gregory. No other child was stopped. No other child was asked for ID. No other child was escorted to the locker area in front of half the community. Gregory opened his mouth but found no words. Shaq leaned back, voice low, precise. "We're not here to argue emotions. We're here to review facts, and your own documents say my son was in full compliance."
There was a pause. Then,
"Well, there's still the question of how this unfolded," Gregory said. "I think there's space for misunderstandings on both sides. Your son..." Shaq raised a hand, not to interrupt, but to still the air. "My son didn't escalate anything. He didn't need to. The people in power did that for him." He took another sheet from the folder. It was a printout of a security camera still, grainy, time-stamped. Shakir standing by the locker room, towel over his shoulder, back straight. Chad leaning in, arms folded, jaw tight. Behind them, visible through the glass, a small group watching silently. "This is your system. Your angle. I requested access to all footage for that day. I also had an attorney pull the community incident reports for the past 5 years." Gregory blinked. "That's not protocol for resident issues." Shaq tilted his head slightly. "And yet here we are." He placed a third page on the table. A chart. The names were redacted, but the columns were clear. Incidents reported, suspicious activity, pool misuse, key fob violations. Of the 47 logged over 5 years, 39 were directed at black or brown residents or guests. Shaq didn't say anything. He let the paper speak. Chad's jaw clenched. "Look, this isn't some witch hunt. I followed procedure."
"No, you followed perception,"
Shaq said, finally meeting his eyes. "You saw a black boy alone, and made a decision. Don't call that procedure. Call it what it is." Gregory interjected, nervous. "Let's not get adversarial." "This isn't adversarial," Shaq said. "This is clarity." He leaned forward, voice still level. "I'm not here to sue you yet. I'm not here to post a video online, yet. I'm here to offer a choice." He slid the final page across the table, a typed letter, unsigned. "A joint public review. Your board, your legal advisor, my attorneys, recorded, streamed, transparent." Or, he let that word hang. "You propose a quiet rewrite of the policies. You retrain your staff. You issue a formal statement to residents. No press, no lawyers. But real change, and you look Shakir in the eyes when you deliver it." Gregory stared at the letter. "This feels coercive." Shaq raised an eyebrow. "You called me here." There was a silence, longer this time. One of the board members, a woman named Carla, who hadn't spoken until now, finally leaned in. "We should have known who he was." Shaq shook his head, slow and steady. "That's not the point." He stood, towering over the table without effort. "The problem isn't that you didn't know who he was. It's that you didn't care who he might be. He turned to leave, then paused. You didn't question his access. You questioned his skin, and next time, it won't be a conversation. With that, he walked out, folder tucked under one arm, no glance back. The room stayed quiet long after the door closed. Back at the pool that afternoon, the plaque gleamed under fresh polish. A few residents walked slower past it. Some even stopped. And that night, the HOA inbox received 37 emails, half angry, half grateful, but all of them watching now. The reckoning didn't need noise. It had presence. A week passed. The heat broke slightly, but the pool remained less crowded. Not empty but cautious. Something unspoken hung in the air now, an aftertaste left behind by a story no one wanted tea in, but everyone had watched unfold. Kids still splashed in the shallow end, parents still sipped iced coffees on the deck, but their eyes moved more. Their conversations paused more often. When someone new walked through the gate, there was no official statement, no apology letter, not yet, but something had begun. In a quiet downtown office 30 minutes away, not some glossy law firm in a skyscraper, but a discreet, purpose-driven legal workspace, with exposed brick and soft lighting, Shaq's legal team had been working non-stop. He hadn't issued any public threats. There were no tweets, no dramatic interviews, just quiet collection, quiet review, quiet preparation. What they uncovered wasn't loud. It wasn't obvious, but it was layered, deep, strategic. They started with Shaq's incident, the security footage, the verbal report, then the language used in emails, sent around the HOA board. Phrases like non-compliant appearance and lack of visual confirmation, code words, nothing that would hold up in court as explicitly racist, but unmistakable in context. They expanded the scope, pulled HOA logs, incident reports, revoked membership records from the past 5 summers. That was when the pattern surfaced, subtle but sharp once seen. Over 30 children, Black, Latino, and in 2 cases, South Asian, had experienced sudden account invalidation, fob deactivations, or staff escalations, all logged under vague categories like potential breach or security concern. None of the children had prior complaints, none of their parents had received formal warnings, and none of the removals were ever contested, because most didn't want trouble. They just left. Shaq's team contacted the families. Many were hesitant, skeptical. Some were angry, not at Shaq but at themselves, for letting it go. One woman, Anna Morales, wept quietly on a Zoom call, as she described her 11-year-old being told he looked older than allowed, and asked to leave mid-swim. No explanation, no follow-up. Her husband had told her to drop it. But now, someone was asking the right questions. The lawyers compiled testimony, dates, correspondence, inconsistencies in the HOA's own documentation. It wasn't enough for a sweeping lawsuit. Not yet. But it was more than enough for a case study in bias masquerading as order. Shaq didn't ask for fire. He asked for light. 3 weeks after the incident with Shakir, a closed-door meeting was scheduled between the HOA board and a select group of residents. Shaq wasn't there, but a monitor was. Mounted on the wall of the clubhouse conference room, quietly powered on as his legal advisor, Teresa Langley, took the floor. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse. She presented. A slide deck opened with the headline, Access Inequities in Member-Based Facilities, a Community Review. What followed was clinical. Specific, data layered with faces. Patterns laid bare. She cited time-stamped footage, pulled direct quotes from board emails, even highlighted where policy amendments had been made quietly, without community votes, immediately following past incidents. Chad sat in the back of the room. He didn't speak, but his fingers drummed nervously against his leg. Gregory, red-faced, cleared his throat too often. Carla, the only board member who had acknowledged the issue weeks earlier, kept her eyes down. Then came the final slide. No data, no charts, just a single line. You didn't create a safer community. You curated a wider one. Silence followed, long and sharp. Teresa didn't linger. She turned off the screen, gathered her notes. Before leaving, she placed a thick packet on the table. These are the families. Names redacted for now. They deserve a meeting, not a review, a reckoning. You decide if it stays quiet. She left the room. Word traveled fast, but not publicly. That was part of the design. Shaq didn't want exposure. Not yet. He wanted realization. And the community began to shift under the weight of it. The HOA inbox flooded again. This time, not with outrage, but with discomfort. With questions. Parents asked why their child had never been questioned, while others had. One former board member, who'd moved away 2 years ago, wrote an open letter to the HOA demanding transparency. Even staff started to whisper. Lila's mom, who had never been more than a polite nodder at poolside gatherings, spoke to 4 other parents that weekend, started a conversation about forming an independent equity review subcommittee. Nothing official, just talks. But the tone had changed. Not shame, not yet, but something closer to awakening. Meanwhile, Shakir had returned to the pool. Not daily, not loudly. He didn't reclaim space. He simply resumed it. He swam laps. He read under the same umbrella as before. Some kids waved. A few offered shy greetings. Others looked away. He didn't seek apology. He didn't perform strength. He simply existed, visibly, unapologetically. One afternoon he saw a new boy at the snack bar. Nervous, holding a fob like it was a test. The staff member waved him through without incident. It was small, quiet, but Shakir noted. At home that evening, Shaq passed by his son's room. Shakir was sketching, something he did when he didn't want to talk. But this time, he looked up. They're acting different, he said. Shaq leaned against the doorframe. That's not acting, that's adjusting. They scared? Shaq shook his head. Some are. Most are just seeing for the first time what they always ignored. Shakir considered that. I didn't want to be a story, he said. You're not, Shaq replied. You're the point. He stepped into the room, placed a folder on the desk. This one thinner, marked with a single sheet, the revised Community Code of Conduct, now with new language on profiling, anti-bias training, and equitable enforcement. It's not perfect, he said, but it's on paper, and on record. That mattered. Shakir opened the folder, read a few lines, then closed it gently. You gonna tell people what they did? He asked. Shaq smiled. They'll tell it themselves. That's how truth works. The next morning a new plaque appeared next to the existing one outside the pool gate. Equity reviewed, August. In honor of those who never stopped showing up, even when they weren't seen. No fanfare, no ribbon, but the message was there. And this time, no one could say they didn't know. The room was quiet, too quiet for what it held. The long rectangular table had been set with water bottles, notepads, and small name cards, like it might help the meeting feel less like an interrogation. But tension doesn't need a raised voice to make itself known. It just sits in the air, thick and present. Shaquille O'Neal sat at the far end, still. He didn't tap his fingers, didn't fidget. His presence filled the space like gravity. The HOA board, all 7 members, were seated across from him, flanked by Chad, who now wore a dress shirt instead of a polo, and a community lawyer with a too-fast smile and a stack of printouts he wouldn't end up referencing. No cameras were present, not officially. It was a closed-door session, confidential. What was said here wasn't meant to go beyond the room. But someone pressed record anyway. Shaq didn't speak first. He let the silence work, the kind that made people examine their own posture. When he finally leaned forward, the air seemed to shift, not just in volume, but in weight. You saw my son as a threat before you saw him as a child, he said, voice quiet but unflinching. What does that say about you? Chad looked down. The lawyer cleared his throat but didn't speak. A board member, Melanie, the youngest among them, blinked hard, her jaw tight. Shaq didn't raise his voice. He never did. The power wasn't in his volume. It was in the mirror he held up to them. I didn't walk in here to punish you. That's not what this is. I walked in here to make sure you look at yourselves. Really look, because if you can't name what you've been doing, then you'll just keep doing it with better words. Gregory, the HOA president, forced a practiced smile. We acknowledge that mistakes were made. That policies were. Shaq raised a hand. Gregory stopped mid-sentence. This isn't about policy. This is about perception. My son followed the rules. You followed a feeling. Let's not pretend they're the same thing. Melanie shifted, something sparking behind her eyes. Discomfort, but also recognition. The lawyer tried again. I think there's space to mediate. Shaq turned to him slowly. You don't mediate being seen as human. A pause. Then you correct it, publicly, fully. Or you leave it broken and wait for someone else to fix it when it's already too late. Chad finally spoke. Quiet. Measure. I didn't mean to make him feel that way. Shaq looked directly at him now. You didn't have to mean it. You just had to do it. The room was still, breathless. And somewhere in that silence, through the lens of a board member's phone camera, hidden in their lap, the truth was captured. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was exact. 3 days later, the video leaked. No name on the account. Just a This is how you confront the system. Listen to Shaq. The clip was only 90 seconds long, but it spread like wildfire. Not because it was fiery, but because it was quiet and devastatingly honest. It wasn't Shaq's fame that carried it. It was the simplicity of the truth laid bare. You saw my son as a threat before you saw him as a child. That sentence echoed through living rooms, through newsrooms, through school hallways and community Facebook groups that suddenly had threads hundreds of comments long. Shaq didn't do interviews. He didn't post about it. Shaq here certainly didn't speak, but the silence from them only made the noise louder elsewhere. The mayor of the city issued a statement. The HOA held an emergency town hall. The local news ran a segment titled, "The Price of Perception, What Does Community Really Mean?" Neighbors who had once offered tight smiles at the pool began speaking differently. Some with regret, others with reflection. An older couple 2 doors down from the Shaq O'Neills brought over a handwritten note. They didn't use the word sorry, but they wrote, "We saw him there, we just didn't see him." Even former staff reached out. A retired HOA member admitted privately that several families had been flagged on internal lists before. No proof. Just notes like "doesn't blend" or "frequent guests." It hadn't started with Shaq, but it might end with him. The system, tight as it had been, began to tremble. And through it all, Shaq remained where he had always been. Steady. Not loud, but present. The mirror was still held up. Whether they liked what they saw, that was on them. At home, Shaq sat on the porch one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The air was still hot, but there was a breeze now, a quiet one. He looked up as his father stepped out beside him. "They're all talking," Shaq said. "They're supposed to. Do you think it'll change anything?" Shaq took a moment. Then, not everything, but enough to make the next boy feel like he doesn't have to shrink when someone questions him. Shaq didn't reply right away. Then he said, "It felt like I was small that day." Shaq nodded. "That's what they wanted, but you weren't. You're never small, you just hadn't made them see it yet." Shaq watched the trees for a while. The mirror had been turned around, and it hadn't cracked. It had reflected. The pool was quieter now, not abandoned, but observably cautious. After the video leak and its viral fallout, after the local exposés and the whispered apologies from familiar faces, attention hovered like static in the air. It wasn't just embarrassment anymore. It was uncertainty. Something had shifted beneath the surface, and now everyone was waiting to see where the cracks would spread. But the real fracture didn't begin at the pool. It started with a single name on a forgotten HOA spreadsheet. Shaq O'Neil, flagged 3 weeks before the incident. No infraction, no complaint, just one column marked with a faint digital highlight. Observe for pattern. It meant nothing to most, until Shaq's team found it. They traced the tag to its source, an internal member sensitivity memo distributed among upper HOA staff after an off-record meeting. The author? HOA chairwoman Evelyn Travers. A long-standing figure in the neighborhood, Evelyn had built her reputation on structure, stability, and community values. But in a tucked-away Slack message, later subpoenaed, she referred to new residents from high-turnover areas as potential destabilizers. When cross-referenced with property records, her cousin's name surfaced under the community staffing subcontract Chad. Not a lifeguard, not an employee trained in youth conflict, de-escalation. Chad was hired through a private family contract, one Evelyn quietly facilitated. No vetting, no oversight, just nepotism hidden behind the language of local engagement. The message was clear. Shaq's encounter hadn't been random. It had been orchestrated. Not a takedown, just a gentle push. A quiet test of limits. A warning disguised as a question. But now the warning had detonated. Within days of this internal connection being exposed, not by press but through a carefully curated memo leaked to select community members, everything began to unravel. HOA sponsors, particularly those from real estate development firms and landscape design brands, withdrew their yearly donations. One financial backer, when reached for comment, offered a single line. We don't invest in communities that suppress the communities they claim to support. Board meetings grew heated. Internal disagreements surfaced. Evelyn denied knowledge of Chad's actions. Chad claimed it was all a misunderstanding. But the digital trail was too clean, too methodical. Nothing violent, nothing overt, just enough to create exclusion without noise. And the noise now was deafening. While board members scrambled, Shaq was not on the news. He wasn't staging press conferences. He was watching, waiting, calculating. Because while others saw chaos, he saw opportunity. Behind the scenes, investor groups tied to Shaq's network began a slow, silent retreat from the Development Management Corporation. Land leases were reviewed. Construction timelines frozen. Funds paused. Without outward confrontation, the neighborhood began to feel the chill of withdrawal, not of protest, but of capital. Then came the auction notice. The HOA, faced with legal inquiries, pulled investments, and a fractured board, was forced to restructure its debt obligations. 2 parcels of undeveloped land, along with the management oversight of the Central Community Trust, were put up quietly for strategic rebuild. Most residents never noticed. But Shaq's team did. Through a shell-holding firm based out of Atlanta, the trust oversight was purchased, discreetly, legally, and unchallenged. It wasn't until a routine neighborhood bulletin listed the updated ownership that anyone noticed the change. Effective immediately, Palmetto Grove Development and Oversight managed by Unity Equity Group. Principal board member, S. O'Neill. It landed like a whisper. At the next board meeting, Evelyn arrived 20 minutes early to prepare notes on damage control. The seats filled slowly, but this time the tension wasn't from cameras. It was internal. Eyes flicked between documents and one another. Gregory cleared his throat. We need to address the change in oversight. Before Evelyn could speak, Melanie, the youngest board member, read directly from her tablet. Unity Equity Group now holds 62% management control of Palmetto Grove operations. Ellen paled. There must be a mistake. That land isn't residential. No, it's foundational, Melanie said calmly. The lots you said were recreational expansion reserves are tied to the legal charter. The group holding them owns operational voting rights. Majority won. Evelyn sat back, silent. Chad, seated behind her, visibly sunk into his chair. And just as the room reached its most uncertain stillness, the door opened. Shaq stepped in. No legal team, no notes. Just presence. He walked slowly to the head of the table. Gregory stood to offer his seat. Shaq declined. He remained standing. I won't stay long, he said. Just long enough to make something clear. He looked at Evelyn. You tried to make my son feel small. Not by yelling. Not by threats. By design. She flinched. Slightly. But here's what design gets you. He pulled a folded document from his inside coat pocket. The property trust deed. The title. I don't need your apology. I don't even need your seat. He turned to face the whole room. I just want you to understand one thing. You can remove a child from your pool, but you can't remove a father from his legacy. You can't cancel the man who owns the land beneath your meeting room. He placed the deed on the table and walked out without another word. That night, the bulletin board by the clubhouse was updated. A new letter posted, unsigned but unmistakably authored. Dear residents, your community belongs to all who live here, not just the ones you expect, not just the ones who look like your reflection. True community isn't measured by who you keep out. It's defined by who you let belong. Ownership isn't just land, it's accountability. No one tore it down. No one argued with it. Because now, even those who once turned their heads knew the truth. The chain of control they trusted, it had been twisted into something else. Not revenge. Design. The sky was the same shade of blue it had been months ago. Bright, still, full of summer. But the air around the Palmetto Grove pool felt unmistakably different now. Not heavier, not tense, lighter, like something had been cleared. Like a weight, silent but constant, had been lifted from the chest of the neighborhood itself. The laughter returned first. Not all at once. Not loud, but in small waves. Children shouting names in play, splashing water with abandon. Teenagers lounging on chairs with wet towels, arguing about music. Parents relaxed under shade umbrellas, talking not about controversy, but about school schedules and weekend barbecues. The pool felt like what it had always promised to be, a place to gather. But now, the difference wasn't just in the atmosphere. It was on the wall. Above the front gate, in new brushed steel lettering installed. Just a week earlier, a sign now greeted every visitor. Community is access, not appearance. No branding, no attribution, just truth. Shakir walked through the gate, towel over his shoulder, swim goggles bouncing against his chest. He moved with an ease that hadn't been there before. Not arrogance, just belonging. He wasn't alone. A few kids from school called out to him. Already halfway into a game of pool tag, he dropped his towel on the same chair he had once been pushed away from and dove in. The water caught him like it always had. Equal, weightless, without question. Near the edge of the deck, Shaq sat in the shade of a low umbrella. No entourage, no headlines, just a father, watching. He wore sunglasses, but his eyes tracked every movement, not out of caution anymore, but quiet pride. He didn't need to hover. He didn't need to be on call. Shakir was free, not just to swim, but to exist here as fully as anyone else. Months had passed since the last confrontation, but the ripples were still moving. There had been no lawsuits, no settlements. Shaq had declined every high-profile media offer. Instead, he stayed local, purposeful. He met with the board privately, not to scold, but to instruct, not to shame, but to insist on accountability. The original HOA board had dissolved shortly after the oversight transfer. In its place, a rotating elected committee of residents, now required to complete annual equity and bias training, funded entirely by the O'Neill Community Foundation. And the rules? They had changed. Not just on paper, but in practice. The new rulebook was simple, rewritten by a working group of parents, youth advocates, local civil rights leaders, and former critics who had been invited, not excluded. Every policy now had to pass what they called the Shakir test. Would this rule apply the same way if it were your own child? Would you enforce it with the same energy, the same assumptions, the same grace? Bias training was no longer a checkbox. It was embedded. Staff were not only certified, they were mentored. Not by HR, but by community leaders, teachers, and volunteers who knew how to rebuild perception from the ground up. Even Chad, the guard who had started it all, hadn't been erased. At first he had disappeared. His cousin Evelyn had moved to another state, after resigning in a storm of public scrutiny. But Shaq had declined to press charges or demand firings. Instead he had asked one question: do you want to repair what you broke, or just hide from it? Chad chose to stay. And under the guidance of the very youth coalition that had once called for his removal, he now volunteered weekly at a mentorship program downtown. Not as a figure of authority, but as a listener, a learner. His job now was to lead by example, not by protocol. Transformation, not just consequence. That was the new justice. It wasn't loud, it wasn't polished, but it was real, and it was working. As Shakir climbed out of the pool, water dripping down his arms, a younger boy tapped him on the shoulder. "You're the one from the video, right?" Shakir hesitated, then nodded once. The boy didn't say anything else, just smiled and dove back into the water. Shakir smiled too, then sat on the edge, kicking his feet slowly, watching the surface shift. From the far side of the deck, a woman approached Shaq. She wore a sundress and a ball cap, with a clipboard tucked under her arm. "Mr. O'Neill?" He turned slightly. "I just wanted to say thank you. My nephew, he used to hate coming here. Said it made him feel like he didn't exist. Last week he asked if he could bring his friends." Shaq gave a polite nod. He's starting to see himself here. Shaq didn't respond right away. Then he said, "That's the only win that matters." She nodded, understanding, and walked away. The sun shifted higher in the sky. From beneath the umbrella, the pool shimmered, not just from the light, but from the motion. Kids of every background shared space without effort. There were no fences of tone, no walls of unspoken rules, just people, coexisting, laughing, belonging. A voice, soft but resolute, began in the background. Not spoken aloud, but imagined, as if echoing from the foundation of everything that had changed. They thought this would be about shame, but it became about sight. And now, they see. Shaq watched his son throw his head back in laughter, a perfect arc of water shooting skyward behind him. And somewhere deep within the quiet joy of that moment, he knew justice hadn't come in a roar. It had come in a choice they never saw coming, but one that would echo far beyond this pool, and into every space where access had once been mistaken for appearance. What happened at the pool wasn't just about one boy, It was about every space that claims to be for everyone but silently decides who belongs. If that strikes a chord, don't scroll past it. Ask what your own neighborhood reflects. Then ask who still feels invisible in it. Because stories like this don't end. They